Hello friends, and welcome to the next edition of Scheduly Noted. If you haven't watched videos 0 and 1 yet, that means you should go ahead and check out the previous videos in the playlist linked down below so you know what's going on, and you should also subscribe so that you can see future videos in this series. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So today's focus is business logic, which will be defining our routes and our controllers. So my intent is by the end of this video to have a fully working API. So that is some exciting development. So I'll go ahead and set up our routes folder and our controllers folder. All right. And for this, I'm kind of developing in a pattern that I might not necessarily develop with. Just trying out new styles, especially with like my import-export structure. I'm just trying for some clean consistency's sake. So this, if you've watched a lot of my other videos too, is a little deviation from kind of the standard, but it's always nice to try something out new once in a while, right? So for this, all right. Now I don't know if I should call this controller auth or users, but I'll leave it as users for now. So let's go ahead and import the request handler type from Express. So I like when defining any sort of express request function. I mean, the function itself is a request handler, so I like typing it as a request handler instead of individually typing the request, response, and next function parameters, just because you type one thing instead of three, so it's just easier, but hey. So I'll define this register controller here, give it a type of request handler, and if I were to stay here and have it focused on the type definition for my parameters, we can see here that it is typing accurately the request handler with my rec variable as an express request, my res variable as an express response, and my next variable as an express next function. So, there we go. Alright, we're going to do some destructuring out the rec body. Name, email, password. I think username as well. I've actually forgotten my types. It's been a few days since I've looked at this, so we'll go look at what we require for the user object. Name, email, username, password, phone. That's right. And then everything else is managed by the database. So the ID, email verified and phone verified both have default values, as does MFA preference of none. So and let's see. I should create like a series of validator utilities. That would be kind of convenient to be able to just dump these into an array and have that array check for the existence of it, the truthiness, just to make sure I don't have any undefined variables, any non-string variables here, any string variables that are empty, which would also be falsy, so that check would also work for undefined and empty strings. And that maybe I have like a minimum and maximum length of each. Yeah, let's do that. So, like I said, I've been changing things up. And, I could use a validation library. Zod would actually be pretty great here. But, this project's just kind of exploring new things. So, we're going to create our own custom little library here for validation. So, And we don't need anything to import here, so I'm trying to think of potential arguments to send in. For this, I mean, for this app itself, I think I don't really have any types deviating from strings or numbers. Booleans. Yeah. Okay. Well, with just strings and numbers, we could have isDefined simply return the truthiness of the element. If I am also potentially sending it a Boolean, we need to explicitly check to see if that element is defined. So is defined. And here we'll return type of value equaling string. So we'll just have a few like type of checks here in place. Oh geez, let's see. All right. I'm also going to define a few array methods in case I have like an array of strings, which we kind of do with all of our parameters there that will go through and validate this. And that way I don't have to call, you know, is string is defined for everything. I just have to give it the array of those values and run through like array dot, you know, all our strings. So I'm going to use the array every here function, and we're going to return, let's see, all our strings. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a justification why I shouldn't check for is defined in some values, because like the value of an undefined element should be undefined, right? Hold on a sec. Yeah. So we don't need it if we are doing a type of check. So yeah, here I'll just go ahead and check to see if is string val. And so now I can just pass in the array of values to all our strings, and it's going to let us know if everything is a string, and that implicitly also checks if it's defined. Now, like I was saying earlier, this is not, I don't have any truthiness checks going on. So if somebody sends in like 0 or an empty string here, it's going to fail. So what I'm going to do is change this verbiage to strings are good for the function name, and then we're going to check to see if this string, this value is a string first, and then we'll check for the truthiness of it. So we can just do a short circuit checking for the truthiness of val. And so that, I think I'm fairly happy with. I'll continue adjusting this as we see fit, but now I have this strings are good array checking method where I just dump pretty much everything from the rect body in, and the values.every, the array.every function returns true or false whether or not every element matches these conditions. So this is going to give me true if every value in my values array is a string and is truthy, and if I have one thing deviating from that, it'll say, false. So it's not going to tell me like which one deviates from that, but the nice ease of use of that is I can cut all of these out, import validators from utils validators. I don't have anything daisy chained out of my index. Oh wait, no, because I only have one I don't have like a validator folder, sorry. This isn't big enough yet to kind of merit that, so it's just kind of all in utils. So we've got our validators imported, and now what we can do is give strings are good an array of these values. So we can just take everything from the rect body, and here we'll check to see if they're not good. You will return a message, and we could change this up to not just like lazily use every. What we could do is we could use something like filter, and anything that does not pass a check, we could just like negate, these checks here, and that way we would have an array of bad values, and that way we could send that back to our user. That might be kind of a nifty thing to have. All right, so strings are good is actually going to be returning an array and an is good Boolean property. So let's do bad vals, and then here we'll do values.filter, and we're gonna take every val and we're gonna return where not is string or it's not truthy. So this will be an array of just garbage data, and what we'll do is return the array of bad vals, and we'll have an is good. So if not results dot is good has bad. I'm trying to think of like the variable like usage I would want to use in my if statement. So I'll, I want this property to be true in the event it's bad. So I can say like if, results dot has bad values. Yeah. And we're gonna just derive that off of the bad values array.length. So if there's nothing in there, it's going to be 0, which is falsy, so has bad values would be false, but if it's 1 or greater elements in there, well, the length is going to be 1 or greater, which any integer, any non-zero integer is going to be, truthy. So, okay, I'm happy with that, and we're going to use that here. So. Okay, so I don't exactly hate this too much. So it returns has bad values and bad vals. And give me just a sec. Oops, sorry about the interruption. Was expecting a phone call, and I heard my phone going off. So, yeah, I don't exactly hate this. So. We return has bad values, and if it's true, we'll go ahead and say error missing, I'll get rid of that. Say missing some values, or some values may not be filled out. And we can leave this pretty vague because that bad values array here is going to be like, oh, username is an empty string. So that way we've got everything really nicely taken care of for us here. And all we have to do is just dump that, out into that validator strings are good. So, cool. Now we know that we at least have strings for all 5 of those, and they're all truthy. So easy peasy. Now we can actually go ahead and start with our logic to get everything taken care of. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new user object, which is yet again just kind of like recomposing these properties into a new element. We're going to import bcrypt from bcrypt. And then what we're going to do is reassign password here. Or actually, well, if I go ahead and give this the user type, password is going to be missing from it, and so it's going to warn me. I could do like user with like an omit clause on password, but then if I later add it, I could do like an inline type that omits password and then it adds it as an optional property. Or I can do as I always do, which is type this as the user object, let the plaintext password be placed in it, and then just reassign it. Let's see. Oh, and I think I have a base user type. No, I don't. Okay, great. So this is why it's actually yelling at me. It's because I've got all of these database created properties as mandatory. But when I'm creating a user, I'm only creating these 5 properties. So what I really need to do is create a distinct interface here where I put these properties in, and I'll call this base user. And this I would use if I were creating or potentially updating my user object, because these are all managed and assigned by the database with the exception of MFA preference. But here, if I want to assign an entire object at a time, base user will fill that role, and now I can just tell user to extend that. Okay. Let's see, and I don't have this function as async. And if I do have any missing values, bcrypt can throw an error. That being said, we have validated password, but also that being said, I'm still going to go ahead and set up my try catch here. We'll go ahead and take the plaintext password, and we'll tell bcrypt to go through 2 to the 12th amount of rounds. All right. And the bcrypt library for Node is pretty rad because you don't have to generate a salt manually. Just by using the hash function and providing the amount of rounds, it generates the salt for you. So this is functionally equivalent to like await bcrypt dot gen salt 12. It's just, if that's getting taken care of behind the scenes for you automatically, why wouldn't you just write the easier code? So now we've constructed our new user object, we can go ahead and dump that user into the database. So we will go ahead and import our DB index here. Wait, db.users.create. This takes a user object. Pretty rad. Oh, and I said new user object, but I need to update the type definition of that. So everything else is dealing with the user type, with the exception of create, which is just that elementary user object, because this is a pre-existing user object, this is a pre-existing user object, this is one that has not been created yet. So query okay, yeah. I was like, wait a sec. I was like, that's not the response type I was looking for. I was like, oh wait, I'm doing this project with Postgres. I was like, wait a sec. It's like, what generic did I name query result, and why does that take its own? No, that's Postgres's that I did as a default. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I don't know if I try to manually make this like MySQL. From time to time I will, from time to time I will also go a little overboard and say if my command is an insert, I will go ahead and reformat the result object for an insert to have an insert ID property. Because in my opinion, I wish Postgres, or at least the PG library, would do something similar, because you can tell your query itself, to return the freshly created element with returning, and I'm just going to ask for the ID property. I don't really care about the rest of the data. But with its return type for any non-select, it's going to have that rows property. And for an insertion, if you specify the returning clause here and pass in whatever properties, that rows property is going to have one element back, the one you just created. So you'll reference like your metadata dot rows at index position 0 dot id, and instead of that you could just say like metadata dot insert id, and it's just a lot cleaner in my opinion. I definitely prefer MySQL's approach to that, but sometimes I will actually format my Postgres connector query function to automatically do it, to kind of create like a hybrid between the two database engines. But in the absence of that, we will extract rows out. And so this is what I'm talking about. I wouldn't have to destructure rows out. I could just directly destructure insert ID and even alias it as ID in there. But here I have to do this extra step. Man, we software developers are a whiny bunch. We will complain about literally anything and everything. But once this is done, we have a successfully created user, and we can go ahead and give a 201 because we did insert a user into the database. And the reason why I always send a message property on any error I have and a message property on any non-error I have, but for any non-select, is that it makes client-side error handling very lazy and very easy, especially if you're using some kind of like API, fetch wrapper with like sweet alerts thrown into the mix. So we'll end up doing something like that client-side to make it super, super smooth. But here, say successfully created accounts, and then we'll bounce the ID back because we probably will like navigate to a user page or something, and we can show like their events, which I mean, this is a registration event, so they're not yet defined, but they would eventually be there. And we'll go ahead and handle any server error we have. So I'll go ahead and put in my requisite message property here, and then say could not register user account at this time, and we'll just console log the error. So like I said for this, trying out a lot of new things. I'm not using like a legitimate logging service. I'm just going to log some errors with the console log. Maybe at the end of this series I might come back to the server and add some new fun features, but for now we'll let it be like this. So we also will want to work on our mailgun logic at the end of this, and you know, here we want to send out that email in order to force our users to register. So brain farts. Here we want to force our users to click the link to verify their email. So and if you're wondering how I make this fancily colored, it's because there is an extension called Better Comments, and it shouldn't make it orange by default. It should just be like the regular green comment. Orange is something different. Question mark is blue, exclamation is red, hash is green evidently, but that looks like the standard green. I don't know why it's oh, actually the word to do, there we go. To do is actually one of their clauses that make it orange. But yeah, Better Comments, the extension that makes this formatted that way. So, all right, that is our user registration and all of that. Looks like we've got it taken care of. We actually have our own login middleware, I believe. Yeah. So I already defined it as a middleware specifically, since we're kind of dealing with auth there, and I was already going to define an auth route. So we actually don't need to create login in the user's controllers. Now for change MFA, let's look at the query for that, just to see what we're sending, preference, and then the user ID. That's going to be, you know, serialized into the rec.user property. So that's not something that we are taking from the rec body. Definitely not something we want to take to the rec body from the rec body, because otherwise users could set other users' properties, which is kind of dangerous territory. So preference is the only property we will take. All right. So if not, validators dot, let's see. Yeah, so earlier I was like doing a lot of back and forth with myself. So this isString function is going to check for the, you know, type of being a string naturally, and that also checks for undefined, so we get two birds, one stone. But it could also be an empty string, and an empty string is still a string nevertheless in like the literal term, but in my opinion, I think I'm also going to do a truthiness check here, just because I don't want empty strings. So and since I'm doing that truthiness check as part of the isString method here, we can do this, shortcut that a little bit. because it's doing the exact same thing. I just moved it here, which means now every individual invocation of the isString function gets that assistance. So we're going to slap in that I'm going to change some to the word preference. Just creating kind of a consistent structure for our error messages. All right, and yeah, so I'm just trying to create some consistent structure between everything here. Now, in the event that a user, we have to assume that a user isn't going to use our client-side code. So, we'll have to assume they are circumventing any other controls we have, and they're just making direct API requests. So, somebody could theoretically create an account and then try to change MFA without verifying their account. So we would actually want to see well, that means that maybe in their token, so we are going to be able to read out the user's information from the token itself. From the rec.user property. So we're going to have their ID, email, name, username, I think. So we'll know all of that context, but what we don't know is their verification status. And we could do a database lookup for the user first to make sure they are verified. Let's see. Or we could also put their verification statuses in their token itself. Yeah, let's do that just because that saves us from a database lookup. So we will go to our login middleware. And you know, for our, well, I'll have change MFA sitting behind the token check middleware, so somebody can't get a token unless they log in. I don't do an automatic registration of a user, or I don't do an automatic granting of a token in the event a user registers, so that's actually kind of a moot point here. So we can assume that that's the case. But, you know, we'll go ahead and add that context in. So I'll actually go ahead and take those from yeah, so I mean, we can pretty safely say like email verified is true in that event because that token can only be granted if they're actually verified. So, and here, yeah, so I just updated my payload type and I only have one, you know, element here in my middlewares that is incorrect because everything is like super dynamic, all referring back to that payload type. So here in my middlewares, it's being used incorrectly because I'm missing that data. So email verified is going to be, based off of the user account, as will phone verified. Okay, so those are all now part of the rec.user.id or rec.user object. We need the user's ID, and we need their email verified and their phone verified, just to make sure, like I said, email verified is going to be true at this point. There's no way they can get a token unless they're verified. Phone verified, however, we'll want to send up an error and send out a new text to verify their phone in the event they try to change their MFA preference to their phone without actually having verified it first. Here, I also want to type the rec body as an object with the preference property being derived from the user object preference property. And that means I get IntelliSense on those strings, so I can't screw that up. That would be MFA preference. Alright, so here I can say if preference is equal to phone and not phone verified, for this, I'll do a simple status code of 400 or so. Saying cannot change MFA preference to SMS without verifying your code or verifying your phone. Please check your phone for a new code to verify. Alright, so we'll set up another to-do here. And just for safety's sake, we can check to see if they're trying to say email and not email verified, which shouldn't ever occur, but we are going to handle that nevertheless. So I'll go ahead and say cannot change MFA preference to email without verifying your email. Please check your inbox for new code to verify. Okay. So beyond this point, we know that if they chose phone, they have their phone number verified. If they chose email, their email is verified, which should pretty much always be the case. And if they have none, well, in order to disable SMS, so what? So db.users.update MFA. Well, that's going to take a preference. We should also validate that preference is not one of these three values. So what we can do here is say, and I'll do this validation in line with this, so I'll say, and one thing that I like to do is if I have a series of conditions, I don't want to say if preference does not equal email, or preference does not equal phone, or preference does not equal none. It's kind of tedious. So what I like to do is use the array.includes and kind of flip the script. So instead of seeing if my element is not one of three conditions, I could check to see if an array of the 3 conditions does not include my value. So I will make an array of email, none, and phone. And I will check to see if not that array dot includes preference. And so that saves me from having to do like 3 manual checks. And if I do something like pizza here, well, I was checking for like a positive assertion. Thought TypeScript would be a little fussier about that. At the very least, though, this is pretty convenient because instead of 3 individual checks, it's just the array of conditions and checking to see if it's not including our preference value in that array. So all right, so we send up our preference value, and then we take our ID from our rec user. So yet again, that is not something that should ever be in the rec body. That should be derived from your token, because if it's from the rec body, anybody can set anybody else's MFA status, which is very dangerous, because if somebody has a really secure account, you don't want anybody just saying, okay, well, I'm going to set their MFA to none, and then boop, it's obliterated. So well, that is our MFA and register controller logic. So let's go ahead and export default from here. I'm a little torn. Architecture-wise, I'm kind of thinking now maybe I should have my register logic here in my middlewares. I feel like it belongs a little bit better there than it does purely in users. Yeah, so let me do this. I'll cut it out. I'll paste it above login, because like naturally that kind of feels more intuitive. Like you register, then you log in, then you check tokens. And what I can do here is take any unused imports, paste them here, and I need validators and DB in here as well. I already do have validators. My import structure is disgusting at the moment. Actually, yeah, so the only database, I only have 3 database queries for my users table. One is registering, one is logging in. So those are more like auth controllers, my middlewares effectively. And then, yeah, changing MFA is like my only like pure non-auth user query. And non-auth is a bit of a stretch there too, because, you know, actually is dealing with auth. Alright, so I've got my imports and then my types. Let's see, library imports first, my library imports second, types last. Alright, just doing that little bit of cleanup there. And that's actually it, I think, for like the users tables. So let's go ahead and start getting our router structure in place. I'm going to create an auth folder and an API folder, or an app folder. Auth here can be pretty small. Let's see. Since we are going to be dealing with some email MFA stuff and SMS MFA, This folder will expand a little bit more from beyond this point, but for now it's not too terrible. Got our auth router created and just minimum viable product, something imported and exported. Here's our actual auth or our routes folder index. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing here. And then we are also going to go ahead and import our auth folder index. So imports auth router from /auth. Oop. Router.use auth router with an API path preface. There we go. Want to make sure all of our paths are lined up correctly. Our auth index here, it's going to import from our middlewares. And I call this index. I'll rename it to like auth.mw. To MW. I guess I'm happy with that. All right, we'll have a post to /register, so /auth/register is going to take us to mw.register, and then router.post to login. It's going to take us to mw.login. There we go. Token check itself is gonna be, chained in front of any API requests needing to validate your user account status, which is going to be pretty much everything. So we'll probably actually have that sitting at the top of the API index, to be honest. Yeah. What am I doing? And here I said auth router. I should use, the actual auth router there. I mean, changing MFA preference, I could make a users table for this. I think, however, I'm going to put it in auth. I might change my mind on this later, but I'll go ahead and do that here. So we'll make a post request to /auth/change/MFA. Or sorry, make it a put request because we're trying to do an update here. And this one would be our middleware, will just be a controller here. And so for our controllers folder, I don't have anything daisy chained up. So I have everything default exported out of the individual users file, but here I need to import users from users and do my usual daisy chaining. So export default users here. And that means that here I can now go ahead and import my controllers. And then here, controllers.user, users, plural, .change MFA. Okay, I'm happy with that structure. And I won't be doing API routes in this video because it's starting to get a little stretched out, but I will go ahead and get my index router at least set up so we can have that linked into our API index router. Alright, and then my usual workflow, just importing, creating the router, export defaulting the router, and then I really should think of like an Emmet abbreviation shortcut to integrate into VS Code just because this is written a lot. But now that that is created and exported, you can come over here and import it. And we can go ahead and get it set up here. And then finally, I'm trying to think if there is a singular use case for not having any API requests behind authentication. For this application, really everything does need to be private. So if we go look at our database queries for events, like this is going to be selecting all of a user's calendar events or selecting one of theirs or creating a calendar event or updating one of theirs or deleting one of theirs. You know, anything that does any sort of mutation to your database absolutely has to be behind authentication middlewares. And these are also not intended to be public elements. These are going to be private and distinct to every individual user. And since this is a very small API with only 5 queries and 5 endpoints for events, then yes, all of that does need to be private. So conveniently enough for us, with that token check middleware we defined, we can very easily go ahead and slap that middleware on every API route, just like that. And now inside of the API folder, every route that we link up and define, we can use the serialized rec.user object from that middleware, and we can safely know that yes, that is a valid, legitimate user, and they can only select their own and alter their own bits of data. So I think that is likely where I will leave this off for the time being. Let's go ahead and get everything committed and pushed. And if I don't do this on video, I will forget. So I'm having you guys be my accountability buddies by making me do this. But we'll go ahead and come over here to source Scheduly noted, get status. We're going to have a handful of new files. And just looking at what was created, we created a little bit of a validation library, not really anything of too terrible note. I'm not going to even mention that in the commit. We basically just set up all of our authentication controllers and routes. So I'll add every one of those files, and I'll say git commit -m created auth controllers and set up auth routes. And I'm going to say initial because we still have a good bit to go for the actual email verification and text message verification logic. But for now, assuming those parts are complete, our auth is pretty much taken care of. So, got that committed, I've got that pushed. So if you are following along, we do have this now on that repo, and you can see between every video the commits that correspond with each video I've done. So, if you've liked this video thus far, please go ahead and like and subscribe so you can be notified when the next edition comes out. But until then, I'll see y'all later.